Welcome back to the Obvious Choice podcast. So happy that you're here. Happy to be joined by Amber, by Ren, always. Amber and Ren and I were discussing what we wanted to be when we grew up, when we started recording this podcast, because Amber, as always, was laughing at just how completely dumb I am. And I asked her if this is what she thought that she was going to do when she grew up, and she said that she actually wanted to be an animator for Disney, and then she realized that she couldn't draw. And not dissimilar from my story, I thought that I was going to be a professional athlete, and then I realized that I was a 5'4" Jewish guy who doesn't have any athletic ability. So hopes and dreams are squashed. I hope that you're doing good. Today, we're talking about the difference between good information and bad advice, and how to recognize good information that's good information for somebody else that's bad advice for you. And I want to start with a story. This is a story from an event that I was at. And there was a woman on stage. She was sharing some behind the scenes of her fabulous business. And her business really was quite an impressive business. And so on stage, right, she shared 4 different marketing systems for 3 different programs. Each of it has its own content, emails, paid advertising. And it was impressive. But I couldn't help but looking as she was talking around the room, and I saw all of the other attendees, their eyes were glazed over, man. And I couldn't help but thinking that they were thinking the same thing as me, which is something to the tune of, yo, if I've got to do all this just to make a living, count me out. Now, at this event, many of the other speakers, both men and women, had similar presentations. And something about what they were saying or how they were saying it was just missing the mark. Like you kind of, you get the feeling, you look around the room and you're just like, I can't be the only one thinking this. Like, this is not the right room for me to be in right now. Not that this is a bad room, not that the information is bad. This is just not the right room for me to be in. So I wondered why. And in order to figure that out, I inverted the situation. Instead of looking at what was there, I thought about what was missing. One of the best ways to figure out whether good information from smart people applies to you is to actually shift your focus away from what you see and onto what you don't. The speakers all used words like hustle and sacrifice. And I used to buy into those mantras. For close to a year, right, I worked on my business from 9:30 p.m. to 2 a.m. after a full day of work. This period of intensity made me realize that if you want to one day have what others don't, you have to at one point be willing to do what others won't. So what changed then? Why do I think that hustle culture is super cringy today when back then I embraced it? It's pretty simple. I got married and I had kids. The things we respond to at 20, says the author Gabrielle Zevin, are not necessarily the things we're going to respond to at 40, and vice versa. So I thought, how many of these speakers have children? And as it turned out, there were 15 speakers at the event. Their average age was 37 years old. 2 of these speakers had kids. Only one of them built the foundation of their business with a child. The other one built their core business and then had a daughter. So only one of the 15 speakers at this event had a child as they built their business. Now, the guy I was sitting next to, he had 3 boys under the age of 5. Good information for one person isn't good information for everybody. A lack of children didn't render the speaker's information invalid or her success any less credible. It's just important to consider. Obvious choices for other people might not be your obvious choice. Y'all see what I did there?
That was nice. Well done, John.
One of the things that my editor has asked me to do in this book is make sure that I'm consciously returning back to the theme every so often. It's very easy to kind of get pulled away from what you're talking about and be like, I find this interesting. I find this interesting. It's like, yeah, well, like interesting information in a book might not fit in that book. Like you've still got to connect it to the theme of the book. So it's like just every so often, just connect back to the theme. Hence that howitzer of a line. Missing data points often provide a helpful context to figure out whether something's relevant or not to you. So no matter how good the strategy is, the best is not the best for all. And I think it's totally reasonable. And I also think it's very, very common for good information to also be bad advice. I want to talk about this today. When you said that you had a similar experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So we went to the I believe, Evolve conference in Edmonton last month.
Beautiful. Can we just talk about how beautiful the commercial industrial district of Edmonton, Alberta is? It's just, I mean, there's just so much space everywhere.
Crown jewel in the north of Canada.
So many franchised taco joints. I mean, it really, if you have a chance to visit. Andrew
like
Coates, I love you. Don't hurt me if you're listening to this. I love you. Good event. But
it's like the area near the airport, but all of the areas are like the area near the airport. That's what that. I kept driving around thinking the runway's got to be around here somewhere.
Edmonton, Alberta is like the area around the airport, except all of Edmonton is like the area around the airport.
And there are people there nodding their heads up and down, yes, John, because although that was harsh, it was not untrue. But I stayed in downtown and it was lovely. No, seriously, lovely city. I had a good time there. But I'm not.
I really enjoyed it.
Yeah,
and I'll tell you, it really feels good to have it as the last time that I've ever been to Edmonton. I'm really happy that I went once.
I knew I was in the wrong place, John, when people would ask me casually, "Oh, so what are you here for?" Because I don't fit very well into Edmonton.
You're the first black person from North Carolina to ever fly to Edmonton.
Pretty much. Not only was I visually off-putting, but then I spoke to people, and when they heard this southern trash come out of my mouth, they say, "You're not from around here, son, are you?"
No, over and over and over again, I heard people saying to you, they said, "Neat." Oh,
right, yeah. You're so well spoken. But in any case, John, so I would say, "Oh, I'm here for a fitness conference," and they were like, "In Edmonton?" And I knew from that question that I repeatedly got that they understood where they were on the globe. In any case,
you were at the Evolve Fitness Summit, great event put on by Andrew Coates. Andrew, shout out.
Great event.
Go on.
Just tons and tons of purposeful, practical information. One presentation in particular from Hitburn, HIITBURN, lovely couple, incredible organization.
Dennis and Kelsey, fantastic.
Dennis and Kelsey. I was about 5 minutes into their presentation, John, when I glazed over. Right, right away, a few things that I noticed right away about this information. Number one, they seem to have a 15 or 20-year head start on me, generally speaking, in terms of how they market. A lot of email marketing, a lot of email campaigns, automated email responses, et cetera, et cetera. And I think one of the things generally when we see these presentations at these venues is I don't quite know that the presenter accounts for the gap between where the individual sitting in the seats is starting and where they are now, because they have really no choice but to give you they're giving you their now process in the absence of the 10, 15, 20 years leading up to that now process. Yeah, so you're there now.
This is what we do now. This isn't what we did to get to where we are now.
Right. So you're now, and I've got an opportunity to present something at another engagement, so I'm really keyed in on that fact. Your now compared to their now is so distant that you almost can't even fathom starting. Right? And that's disappointing to the listener, as amazing as there now is. So I thought, okay, I'm 49 3/4 right here today listening to this. Do I have until 65 to build this business model? Kind of don't want to do that. So the first thing was the gap. That's why the information was great, but it wasn't beneficial for me. It wasn't helpful for me. The second thing was there were two of them, right? I'm working as a solopreneur, so where one is the face of the business practically, the other is contributing the copy, doing the split testing of what ads work better, what ones don't. And I'm like, well, I'm either hiring somebody here or I'm meeting a beautiful lady that I'm going to marry who's also into fitness, who is willing to be the face of my organization.
Because the third is that they are both way better looking than we are.
Right, exactly. Like, I can't match this. You know, she's throwing pictures of them on the from their presentations. They're throwing that on the screen. Yeah. He's like 6'8". And
they are
like
very, very good-looking people.
They're very
good-looking, tall people. Absolute sweethearts, but very good-looking.
Super nice, people. But I can't match that, John. On my best with half a pound of Crisco rubbed all over my body, with my best smoldering
do not
look.
Continue.
My best smoldering look. I can't duplicate that kind of hotness on camera. I can't do it.
Not even with the Crisco. That's a big statement.
Not even with the Crisco. And I can throw a little Lowry seasoning salt on top.
Yeah,
but,
we'll stop there.
But so I'm looking at the practicality of how they present what they do, and then they get into the actual process that they're using, and I am dumb within 3 minutes. Like, I'm super lost. Great process, really informative. I'm like, I don't even know where to start. Does this go on a website? Do I get a new website for this? It was great information, but it was really bad advice for my business model. Not to mention the model that they have for their their group, their lower price offering with subscription.
Well, they have an app. I mean, their big thing is their app. Yeah.
So none of that was relevant to me. It didn't mean it was bad information. It was just bad advice for me. And I think that in this space, those of us who do the best, Amber and I were talking about this before we got started, are not only self-aware about themselves and an individual, but you have to have a certain amount of self-awareness about your business too. Like, I see. There are chasms that you cannot hop from. You can't hop from one to the other. It's just the gap's too wide.
It's pronounced chasm.
I'm sorry, John. I keep forgetting.
No, that's how it's spelled. That's how it's spelled. Yeah.
You've written books, and I don't know why I keep disrespecting that. However, it's good to be able to realize that while this information is great, and I had a bit of that with Don Saladino too. As awesome as this presentation was, I was like, in the absence of knowing any celebrity, I'm not sure if this strategy, and I subscribed to both of their offerings. I opted in for both of them as soon as I got back. The last notification that I got from Don in my email was how to look like Blake in 30 days, something to that effect. That's Blake Lively, Ryan Reynolds' wife, who's also a mega superstar. Yeah, I can't. What am I going to promote? How to look like Magdalena? Like I don't have that type of clientele.
It's just different. So again, it's a different type of market. And what was interesting about those presentations was there were other people in the audience who were totally into it.
Right.
Who were all in, man. And I think that there's a couple different ways to approach that specific situation that both of us kind of brought up. One is, absolutely, the awareness, as both of you alluded to, of saying, I'm aware of what my business is and isn't, and that's cool. And so this isn't for me. And I don't think there's anything wrong. I think the odds when you go to any kind of an event that's a day or 2 days that every talk is going to be for you it's zero is what the odds are.
Right.
I've organized events. It's impossible to do it. I mean, you have to almost tell a story with the types of things that you include. But I think the other piece is that there are certainly pieces from those talks that you could have pulled out. For example, in the Hitburn talk, they do something really, really great where they talk about just having an idea and filming a piece of content off the cuff. And it's almost like an improv exercise.
Yes.
And they had some people come up on stage. And one of them was Nick, I know, went up on stage. A few others went up on stage and did a great job. And they just showed how they create content. And what happens is Dennis will basically spit out and say, okay, here's the offer. Here's the hook. And then Kelsey will be like, okay, the officer, boom, and she kind of think through it in her head. And this is a muscle that you train, by the way.
Yes.
And then she'll start with the hook. Hey, January's coming up, but you want to get a head start on January, right? One of the things that always happens in January is people blah, 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 blah. And kicks into a video right away. And it's almost like a magic trick.
It is.
When they do it. But they gave the formula of okay, Dennis, so this might be one person if it's one person's business, but they gave the formula of, okay, here's how you figure out what the hook is. Right, here's what's going to grab somebody's attention based off of where they are or what's going on in the world right now. Here's the offer. Here's where this needs to lead to. And then your job with this very short piece of content is basically to fill in the gap.
Fill in the middle.
And so that is an example of something that they were talking about in their presentation that you could then pull out and use probably with whatever anybody is doing. And so there's two approaches, right? One is to say, this isn't for me. I'm taking a break. I get it. Like, I can't sit there and talk all day. I leave for hours of the day. So I think it's fine to take a break and to strategically take a break. Not when I'm talking, because I want a full room, but when other people are talking. But I also think if you're there to actually very quickly identify and say, this whole thing is not going to be for me. Mm-hmm. So my job here is to pick out one thing. Yes. There's a community that I've been a part of for about 10 years. Super, super high-end, very expensive business owner community. And they do one large event a year. You travel there, you go there for 4 or 5 days, and everybody's together. And there's one guy who's been a part of this community for almost the entire time that inevitably leaves the event after like day 2. Because all that he's doing is he's trying to get one nugget. And the minute that he gets that one nugget, he literally books a flight and flies home. Mm-hmm. And just leaves. He's like, I know I can't act on more than one thing at once. Got to have that self-awareness. I think it's really powerful.
I think it's really interesting that you pointed out that one piece from their talk, though, because I think another layer of this discussion is not only what's bad advice, but what's a good tactic that may be wrapped in advice that you can't use holistically, because that one thing was brilliant and relatively easy to practice and implement. And then also from Don, the thing that I got most out of his talk was something that we've talked about here before, is just owning your list, right? So right away when I came back, I started the newsletter that I hated to start and I didn't want to do it, and I set up my email capture and everything like that. And I can't do all of what he does because I'm just not in a similar position. But I did take away some of the simplicity.
But he's built it over time, right?
Right.
I mean,
this
is
done
like
it over time.
I mean, Amber, you see what we're starting to do with Quick Coach now, and we're a year and a half into this project, and we're starting to. I mean, this. I think if there's one thing that I've learned in the last 3 years in business, from getting kicked in the teeth the way that we did, and building back up in the way that we are now, in such a stress-free, fun, much more humble, but much more, I think, human and genuine way, where we're just very much ourselves. And if you like it, by all means, come hang. If you don't, give us a 5-star review for this podcast on Spotify, and then be on your way. But the part of that I've learned, or the biggest thing that I've learned from that entire process, is just this shit takes time. And it is a process. We're in phase 1 right now. I know what phase 2 and I know what phase 3 is going to be. And I know when I'm going to get there. And I'm going to get there once phase 1 is running without my input, in a way that I can trust and don't feel like I need to check. We'll be there pretty soon for phase 2. Year and a half. You had one other example, didn't you, Ren?
I did, because because of the population that I serve and the way it's set up. I work with women primarily over 30, in some cases kind of almost exclusively moms. But we find a lot of great information in the space that is bad advice for the women that I work with. For instance, and people are going to at me for this, but something like fasting, right? Fasted training.
Right.
You talk about autophagy, right? You talk about fat mobilization. Autophagy, like you re-establishing of your cellular makeup.
That is most definitely never a word that I will ever use in a book.
Yeah, don't use it.
No.
But we talk about all these benefits of fasting and how it's helpful for the body, but
Right.
we don't talk about the fact that most of the research on fasting is done on men, right? Men 25 to 30. It's almost never done on peri to postmenopausal women. So for the midlife woman that's having a withdrawal of estrogen, that's less resilient to stress, that has more impact occurs from gut health and microbiome and need to be in a fed state more often to not jeopardize your thyroid function, right? We don't have that conversation. So over and over, my population is subjected to great information that was never done through research on who they are, and they apply that information and things happen to backfire for them. Probably one of the main reasons why I'm in business and thriving in business is because of the fact that I know pretty much every piece of information that a woman over 40 at least is going to get through the internet based on research is going to backfire against the goal that she wants to hit. So you've got great information about fasting. You've got great information about training protocol, great information about protein requirement, and almost none of it, as a matter of fact, less than 6% of all research is even targeted towards this market. And about 80% of the reason that most medications are taken off the shelves is because women were never researched in the first place. And some woman somewhere invariably, or a population, is going to have an adverse reaction to pharmaceuticals. Because that's just the way that it is, unfortunately. So I work in a space nearly every day where I'm getting pushback, even from people that hire me, because I'm giving them information that seems so antithetical to what they know to be true, even though at the time they hire me, they are in the midst of frustration and consistent failure because they don't understand why none of the stuff that I used to do is working anymore, right? So this happens a lot.
So how do you overcome that? Because I feel like that's a very common problem with a lot of the people that are listening to this, where they know the stuff that works. They've worked with a lot of people to help them change, transform, take back control, whatever term you want to use, but yet they still receive a lot of pushback based off of, call it misinformation, ill-advised information, or information that's not right for them. And if they were willing to say the things that people are perhaps open to hearing right now, simply because it's just what they've heard and what we hear often, we think is true because that's just how cognitive ease works.
Right.
And your job as a coach is almost to say, like, no, actually, that magazine is trying to sell magazines, not actually help people.
Right.
How do you approach that?
It's interesting because I heard you once say that at a certain point you reached out to PN2 graduates for mentors in your organization because you know they have a certain skill set for not being particularly combative, and we've sort of been coached to coach better. In this case, I'm really working with.
Well, no, it wasn't that. It was specifically when I wanted coaches. This is when we were looking for coaches for the Online Trainer Academy. You know, we have a coaching upgrade there. So that Online Trainer Academy is for people just starting out training online or making the transition or perhaps struggling, haven't really gotten much going. The Online Trainer Mentorship is for people already at a minimum of 1,000, like 5, 10, 20, 30,000 a month even. You could start and we help you scale up. And so there's a big difference, obviously, between the audiences of those two programs. And the types of coaches, you know, for the Online Trainer Mentorship, the coaches kind of walk the line between being your friend and your coach. You know, they're very much supporting you, but they're also there to challenge you because a lot of the time when somebody has reached a certain level of success, to get to the next, they need to be called out on their own bullshit. Whereas with the Online Trainer Academy, it's usually more a matter of, hey, what are the blocks here? Like, let's get you going in one direction. We don't know exactly where we're going to end up. That's fine. But we know where the beacon is, so let's at least head in that direction and make some positive movements. And so it's a very different type of coach that works well in the two types of programs, as you know quite well then. Yeah. And so the types of coaches for the Online Trainer Academy, for that upgrade there, I was looking for people very specifically who had a lot of experience with motivational interviewing. And so it wasn't necessarily PN2. It was just, I know that motivational interviewing is probably the number one skill that I need to hire for here. I could teach it, but that sounds hard. Why don't I just go somewhere where people have already learned it? That was a thought, but it's worked well. So go on.
Good job.
So I just say that to make the distinction between not PN2 specifically, more it was this skill that I was looking for and why I was looking for that skill. And then it was like, where do people with that skill already exist? And that was just the easiest one that I had access to.
That makes sense. So fundamentally, I'm working with ambivalence. That's what it is. It's exactly what you said, motivational interviewing. If you're not
so what's ambivalence?
It's a human's tendency to respect their own autonomy over almost anything else. I give you the red dress, blue dress, example. You're going out somewhere. You ask your female spouse partner, says, which dress do you think I should wear? You try to stay out of it because that's the smartest thing to do. Oh no, whichever, honey. You look good and everything. No, you always do that. I want you to participate. I want you to say something. And you say, okay, right. Red dress. You get dressed. You're waiting outside in the living room, perhaps, and the blue dress is coming out because you suggested red. Humans have a tendency to hop the fence away from what they're suggested to do. So it's a poor point of coaching to try to tell somebody to do something. This is what I do in the case where people come to me.
This is why when you tell people to do something, they don't do it.
They don't do it.
They don't do it. It has to be their decision.
It has to be their decision. Moms and dads out there, think about telling your teenager, don't date that girl or don't date that boy, and get back to me and let me know how that went. That's what coaches effectively fail at. But in this case, with this situation, I just tell them, hey, I'm happy to support you in whatever choice you choose. My job here is to help you regulate emotionally, to support your decisions, and to make sure you don't do yourself harm. So if you'd rather do keto than learn these habits about eating slowly and say, hey, let's do keto, better for us to do it in this controlled environment where I can protect you and you can ask me tons of questions than to have you leave and do it. And invariably they'll say, no, I've done keto before. I think I'll go with this program. So I soft serve them when they come to me like that, with old advice that's good information, but also bad advice for them specifically, because it's hard for them to differentiate. So I give them the ability to choose, typically with ambivalence. Typically, if you give the human the choice without any pressure, they typically choose the better choice. Yeah. Usually that happens. Not always, but usually. More often than not.
And even if they don't, the worst choice, not necessarily the worst, but the worst choice is also usually not a bad choice.
Right.
If it's controlled. Right. You use the example of keto, the ketogenic diet, like, I don't know, I kind of like pooping, but like, if you don't, do keto, but...
Do you hate bowel movements? Who has the time, right? Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Am I supposed to get a bowel movement every day? Oh, that's just silly. That's why we went into keto. Keto, because shitting's for losers. You're welcome,
Thank you
keto.
for that, because I am absolutely doing something with that segment. There's my project.
Well, that's so funny. John said, I don't know, I kind of like pooping. I like my bowels to move through my intestines, but if you hate that.
But you could absolutely get healthy with keto.
You could.
Especially by virtue of just following any kind of a diet. It's when you follow any kind of a diet and you pay attention to what you eat, you are probably going to eat better. That is how I would say 98% of the success of diets work is just, no, you're paying attention to this before and you didn't pay attention to what you ate previously.
Right. Should I eat this bag of chips or this bacon with butter on it? I'm going to have
right. I can't eat this bag of chips. Allison buys all this keto food every so often thinking that it would be like healthier because, Costco just always has like keto whatever. And so she just like Costco's good because you can just try stuff, which I agree with. And so we often do. So she'll come home with stuff, and I look at the ingredients, and I look at the nutrition information. I'm like, this is so much worse for you than just regular ass food. Like, oh my God! Like, not even chemicals. Like, not even anything to do with that. Whether you think that hard to pronounce names are like bad in foods or not, I'm not getting into that argument with you. Right. It's just like the sheer breakdown of like sugars and fats and proteins and the amount of calories in this little snack or whatever it is. It's like, this shit's awful, dude. And you're not going to poop it out, so it's even worse.
It stays with you. What if you can get taller on keto because you don't know?
Yeah, I would do it then. I would 100% do it.
You just get wider. That's what.
Amber, can you look that up for us if we can get taller with keto? That'd be great.
She's in reluctantly.
But I think, I think it's very important for something to be their choice, I guess is what you're saying. And I think that I'm glad that you brought this up, Ren, because I think that this is a very important part of this conversation of figuring out whether good information is good advice for you, and working with other people that you are perhaps hired to give advice to,
right? But
that have endured an onslaught of good information that's bad information for them for years. That's very hard to fight, even though they have this expert that they've brought on now. It's still hard to do that. And so as the expert, you kind of have to appreciate that. And that's part of meeting them where they're at, I think. And saying, I know, we could try that if you want. Yeah, let's work together with that.
So hard to learn that early in your career. And I'm sure equally hard to learn that as a business person, as you've given examples here today, John, when you're taking great information from really successful other business people. Like you right. know that there's winning with it, and it makes sense. It's great information, but just the ability to say, I've got some agency here, and I really need to think about how easily or difficult it's going to be for me to implement this into what I do specifically. That's a really important skill to be able to discern that.
You know how I do it? I just do like one thing. Mm-hmm. I mean, I do so few things, and I try to do those things better and better and better. That's how I do it. I kind of just ignore everything else. Every time that I go on YouTube, Calvin's getting more and more into YouTube. So I've never watched a YouTube video start to finish in my life. Literally never watched a YouTube video start to finish. And so I've never really spent that much time on it. I mean, yeah, sure, like tutorials and stuff like that. I popped on YouTube just to get a tutorial or something. But I'm on it more now because Calvin is on it more now. And so we obviously control it, and we don't have a TV in our house, so he'll watch it on like my phone, or he's got a little tablet. But to be honest, it's such a shitty tablet that like you can hardly even play anything, kind of on purpose. He thinks that video games and everything are just on like they're just like the jankiest, like worst working video games ever because it's the tablet that we bought him is so shitty. It's a good hack. We successfully convinced him one winter that Paw Patrol didn't exist in Mexico. I still remember that. He figured it out the next winter, but
oh my gosh.
Yeah. It's parenting 101.
Subterfuge. Follow John for more parenting hacks.
Follow me for more parenting hacks. But I go on YouTube and I'm looking at it now and I'm just like, oh my God, man, how, like, I can see why it's popular. The amount and the quality of information that's on here and entertainment that's on here is like nothing I think our world has ever seen. And it's getting to be bigger and brighter. And even podcasts these days. I spent an afternoon with a friend of mine who's basically runs one of the biggest business magazines in the world. And we were talking about state of media and things. And we're talking about podcasts. And he gave me a lot of like kind of insider information of the financial models of what's going on because he like knows all of the heads of Spotify and whatever. And first of all, I mean, really suffering. But also like the platforms are not podcasts. but also just this idea that like if you have a podcast now and you want to really make it powerful and successful as a podcast, you basically need to produce a TV show. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. And it's getting to be more and more and more. And YouTube even more so. I mean, YouTube is an unlimited amount with an unlimited variety of fully produced, professionally produced television. Produced in the most addictive way possible, because unlike television used to be produced, where there would be ratings and there would be user groups and they would ask them what they thought, and when they started getting really into kid shows, they actually put eye trackers on the test. So Blue's Clues was the first kid show that was scientifically engineered. It's fascinating, actually. What they did is they put kids in a room and they put eye trackers on them, and they watched the kids, but they also tracked what the kids were paying attention to on the screen and where they were paying attention to and when they looked away. And they started designing the show and the jump clips, and they started designing where words showed up on the screen and stuff like that based off of where the kids' eyes would go. And that was the start of designing addictive TV. But you still couldn't monitor watch time and drop off points in media like you can now. Think about how much that impacts how addictive these things are designed now. Somebody making these things, that's entire job is to get you to watch YouTube for as long as possible, can see exactly where people are dropping off on videos. They can A/B test thumbnails. They can A/B test titles, right? And it's full-fledged television production. I think in a lot of ways, I think it is so impossible to avoid being sucked into it and comparing yourself to it. I really do. To the point where I honestly think so many of us, professionally as well, would be better off pretending it doesn't exist. Now, I realize that's not possible. But shoot for the moon, you might end up in the stars. You know what I'm saying?
It's overwhelming.
It's overwhelming. And it's overwhelming, and it's designed to be addictive. And it's designed to make you think that you need to do things that probably aren't that important. So there's nothing wrong with consuming a lot of material. But you need to know why you're consuming it. You got to move backwards from that. Seek out the thing. Figure out what you're trying to get, or at least give yourself a dedicated time to say, I'm going to figure out everything I can by this date, by this time, and then I'm done. And then I'm acting on it or doing something with it. Versus just, oh no, I'm doing professional development. It's like, you aren't, man. You're watching fucking bips and bops with animations popping up, jacking your brain, making you feel like you're missing out on something. It's wild.
The FOMO, but the information that you just supplied is a good example of great information. Bad advice for me. Like, yeah, I'm barely on YouTube in any capacity, and hearing all the details about A/B testing, something like, it's good for me to know. But I ain't gonna be attempting it anytime soon. I think
understanding for you, for what you want at this point in time, and it can change, I think understanding the difference between good information and bad advice is one of, if not the most important, it's one of, if not the most important things that ambitious people need to get good at. I think that the information economy these days has... I just think the information economy has been designed to work against us in so many ways, because it's been made to be so addictive. It's been made to be so all-encompassing. Yes. It's been made to be so easy and enjoyable to consume. It used to be if you wanted to know something, you had to read this dense-ass textbook or research paper to learn that thing. You had to really figure out whether that was important to make your way through that thing. Whereas now, it's fun to learn, which I think is wonderful. But I think you need to be really, really careful. I think that there are a lot of very ambitious people who are consuming and working hard to consume tremendous amounts of information and getting absolutely nowhere with it. And that's because it's good information produced well. That's, quite frankly, bad advice.
That would be such a good bucket of content, for
chapter
for
in a
any
book.
Niche could be that. But even for Ren, right? With his demographic, here's a common piece of good advice, but here's why it's bad information for you, right? Adding that nuance and using that to tackle, really common issues.
In today's edition of Good Information, Bad Advice,
Yeah.
here's why the
Basically.
ketogenic diet.
Yeah, consider that done, Amber. Thank you for that.
As a text message or an email newsletter or whatever, some kind of series, right? That would be something to look forward to. And then when you see something that you're guilty of,
Yes.
Yeah.
then you get all even before you read it, you get uptight and push, I gotta look.
Yeah, but you have to look. That's
You have
great,
to. You have to.
Great idea and super easy for me to execute. Having spent
welcome.
so much time doing. Thank you for that, Amber. Gosh, I'm glad I showed up today. Didn't have my sound off like I normally do.
That's a really good franchise of content to
It
repeat
really
back.
is. It's a great franchise.
Yeah.
Friday, they do that every Friday. Fridays suck. For content. For content. Generally, Fridays are awesome.
Good morning, happy Friday. This is Ren Jones, the father of Juan Pablo Jones. And today I'm coming back to you
first name
again. Whose
Who's
first
Juan
name is
Pablo
a C?
these shoes, y'all?
His first name needs to be a C. His middle name needs to start with an A. So
So you see, Cajones.
Cajones. Good morning, I'm Ren Jones, father of Cajones Jones. And I'm here again with another edition of Good Information, but Bad Advice. Thank you for joining me on this Friday franchise.
I got to do it quick before listeners of this podcast get a hold to it, because that's great
Yeah,
advice.
seriously.
But they
I
won't.
know.
I'll out execute them. They'll love it, but
Okay.
they won't do it.
there you go.
As always, thank you for listening to the podcast. Really happy that you're here. If you are looking for another episode to listen to, I'm going to recommend you check out episode 76. It's called FOMO, F-O-M-O, which of course stands for fear of missing out. I feel like it really aligns with this topic. There's a lot of hard problems to solve. It's time to realize which hard problems are not worth solving. This idea of we fear missing out on things or we fear missing out on opportunities is rampant and I think is very damaging. And so this episode 76, FOMO, is going to give you the tools to recognize an opportunity that is a good opportunity versus an opportunity that you're just fearful and why that happened. So check out that episode 76, FOMO. Hope that you enjoy it. And when Cajones... That was awful. Oh, God.
It's all right.
Ah, shit.
Good job. It's a good place to put a pin in it, John.
All right, bye.
You won't recover that one.
Podcast out.